Live Fit Podcast, episode 143, Heads Up Health with David Korsunsky.
What was the 52-week high on my favorite stock? I'm like, well, how come I can't check the 52-week high on my blood sugar? And how come I have to log into 4 different systems to look at my medical records? Well, it's because I moved a few times. And these are all completely different systems that don't talk to each other. So that ultimately led, Glenn, to me creating this system. It started as just a massive spreadsheet. And then the engineer in me said, how do I make this and put it online, make it available for anybody who wants to change their health and wants to use a little data? Because just a few numbers can have some really profound impacts on how you modify your health. Maybe after you clean up the diet, you don't need blood pressure medications either. That all cleans itself up. And you start sleeping better. And all these other markers start to improve. It becomes something that can be very rewarding. Maybe you measure your blood pressure. Maybe you use an app like MyFitnessPal. Those all will electronically sync. So you set up your dashboard. I want my weight, my body fat, my steps, my sleep, my blood sugar, my ketones, whatever you're tracking, my waist circumference. And then there's a part where you can also sync up your medical records. The key to our system, Glenn, is we wanted people to be able to see their lab test results, which come from the doctor, right next to the information that was helping them see their lifestyle choices.
Welcome to the Live Fit Podcast with Glenn Johnson, your resource for all things that contribute to good health. You will hear expert advice and interviews with leading authorities on fitness, food, fat loss, mindset, and the mind-body connection. You will find show notes, articles, and health programs at livefitpodcast.com.
Yes, it is time once again for the Live Fit Podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Johnson, your guide to better health. Today's guest is David Korsunsky. The reason I have him on the show today is because he created an amazing piece of software. It's a website, actually, where you can gather all of your health data and track it over time. Now, this may sound pretty simple, but it's not, because this website has to communicate with all these different proprietary brands and companies, things like Apple Watch and Fitbit and MyFitnessPal and Kaiser Permanente and Providence and the VA and all these different organizations his website can communicate with and keep your health information up to date. The best part of it is you can customize your dashboard so you see only the information that you're interested in. For example, you might want to know your blood sugar over time, and if you're checking it and then entering that information, or when your doctor checks it and enters that information, boom, it'll show up on your dashboard, and you can see a graph of it over time. Is it going up? Is it going down? Staying the same? In other words, it's kind of like the dashboard on your car, where you get constant and nearly immediate feedback on how you're doing and which direction you're going. I find it really amazing, and I've been playing around with it. It's pretty user intuitive. It's pretty easy to get going. It's kind of a pain to dig up some of those old passwords and usernames from some of the organizations I used to be involved with, but you just go in and make a new one. So it's not that big of a deal. Just go into it knowing that you might have to do a little hunting and digging. It won't find everything for you. You'll have to point it to the establishments where you were or the devices you have. And that's the only downside I saw with it. I think it's great. I wish I had this 20 years ago. I have a lot of data in notebooks that I would like to see, to track, to see how I'm doing with retarding my aging. I know it's happening, but at how fast? And am I happy with that? Is there anything else I want to do, or pat myself on the back? Oh, and when you go to the show notes page, you'll find out how you can save 20% on Heads Up Health. Enough of that, enough of the introduction. Let's hear from David, and he can tell you right from his mouth how he created this program, how it works, and how it can benefit you. Hey, Dave, how are you doing today?
Doing well, Glenn. Thanks for having me. I'm excited for our conversation.
Yeah, I'm really excited too. Heads Up Health sounds really interesting, and as a person who's an advocate for their own health and who advocates others to be in charge of their own health, I really found this to be an exciting new tool that people can use to track their health and really be in charge of it, rather than giving it to the faceless doctors that used to control everything and play God. But before we get into the details of Heads Up Health, can you give us a little bit of a background of yourself and how you came up with Heads Up Health and how you got into it and whatnot?
Yeah, that sounds great, Glenn. Well, I guess it starts in my upbringing. I was born in Winnipeg, Canada, which is a reasonable sized town on the Canadian prairies, but generally grew up always eating what you would call the standard American diet, and didn't necessarily have a lot of information or education around the food I was putting into my body. Largely ignorant about nutrition and health, and so I grew up on a pretty Western diet, and I always found that I was heavier than other people around me. I always found out that I seemed to exercise more than others, but just would never have the same outward bound appearance, even though I was really athletic. So that was something that always just stuck with me growing up. And through various career opportunities, I ended up spending a few years working in the Caribbean islands for some big reinsurance companies. That was incredible. And then some job opportunities led me to the U.S., spent some time in Boston, spent some time on the West Coast in California. So my whole life, I've been a technologist, and I've always used information and data to solve problems. And it was that engineering mindset, I guess you will, of how I could go in and find out why any software system was behaving badly. And I was not able to have that same level of sophistication with my health. And we have tools in our daily lives to help us with everything around decisions. And it could be simply just looking at financial information. How much am I spending on gas on a given month? What was the 52-week high on my favorite stock? I'm like, well, how come I can't check the 52-week high on my blood sugar? And how come I have to log into 4 different systems to look at my medical records? Well, it's because I moved a few times. And these are all completely different systems that don't talk to each other. So that ultimately led, Glenn, to me creating this system. It started as just a massive spreadsheet where I put all of this information. And that was the first time in my life I could actually see the trends across all the blood tests from a doctor. Just take a simple blood test like total cholesterol. I probably had it checked anywhere from 4 to 6 times over the last 5 or 7 years, but they were all just in separate places. So I couldn't really see how that data was changing as I made different lifestyle modifications, as my diet changed, as I aged, as my physical exercise changed. So it started as a massive spreadsheet, and then the engineer in me said, how do I make this and put it online, make it available for anybody who wants to change their health and wants to use a little data? Because just a few numbers can have some really profound impacts on how you modify your health. And that was the start of it.
What's funny about what you're talking about, a lot of it sounds familiar to me in my life, in my history. And I was in the Navy, and I always found it really amazing because I had been brought up with the isolation of patient from medical records and doctors and all that. And so when I was in the Navy, I would go to a different post. They would hand me a folder with my medical records in it. And I would take that and give that to the new corpsmen to hang on to keep in their files. But when I first questioned, I said, really? You're giving me my medical records? And they said, well, sure, it's yours. And I thought, holy cow, that is so sensical. I can't believe it. And especially coming from the military, which they're pretty famous for, doing things that don't make sense. But then I get out of the military and it's back to the isolation of the medical records. And can I see that? No, you can't. This is your private medical records. I'm like, but it's mine. So
you don't need to see that information. Move along, Glenn. Nothing to see.
Exactly.
Carry on. This is you won't understand this data. Don't worry about it.
I'll tell you what to do. I'll tell you what's wrong with you.
Yeah. Well, that was a huge part of it, and I'm not a medical person at all. I really had no health education other than what I would get from the podcasts I was listening to and some of the books I would read. So I was a lay person, with all due respect, in terms of health. But once I had access to the right numbers, and once I could consult freely with any health expert, I would work with someone who understood nutrition and who understood how to help me with my thyroid. And they weren't prescribing medication. They were prescribing dietary change and lifestyle modification. So I was able to give them access to my entire health history. They would give me some modifications to make. I'd try them and retest. And there's lots of metrics in those lab test reports that I still don't understand. But I think for each of us out there, we have a pretty good sense of what numbers we want to make sure stay healthy. Blood sugar, cholesterol, inflammation, thyroid. So having access to this type of data just gives you a sense of empowerment. And you can see the results of your work showing up when your numbers get better. And it can be really, really rewarding. So that's what we want to provide.
And the truth is, knowing this information can help you make decisions. For example, when your doctor says your cholesterol's high, you should take statins, you don't have to just knee-jerk say, yes, fine, whatever you think. You can do some research and decide if your cholesterol's high enough. And I mean, there is a pitfall with doing research on the internet because there's a lot of sites that are, let's say, not completely accurate, but it's a place to start anyways. And there's some that are more so, and you can definitely find those.
Yeah, cholesterol is a great example. One option is to take a statin, and you might say, hopefully you have a cooperative doctor. You say, okay, that's cool. I'd really like to try some dietary modification first. Can I try going on to a whole food template and eliminating processed foods and sugars? And let's try that first, and then let's see what happens. And you can work on some alternatives before you go down the pharmaceutical path. I don't think there's too much trouble you can get into just making some harmless dietary changes. Most of us have jacked up triglyceride levels. The first telltale sign you have some blood sugar related issues. You've got really high triglycerides. Mm-hmm. And just cutting out refined sugar, white bread, fruit juice, and the things that really spike blood sugar, just with a couple small changes, those lipid panel numbers, the cholesterol, HDL, LDL, they can change dramatically just in a couple months. So you may want to work with your physician or whoever you consult with and say, are there any other therapies I can try first? And then if that doesn't work, you go back and have a conversation, and maybe you need a smaller dose of that statin, or maybe you don't need it at all. And maybe after you clean up the diet, you don't need blood pressure medications either. That all cleans itself up. And you start sleeping better, and all these other markers start to improve. So it becomes something that can be very rewarding.
And to be fair to present-day doctors, there are many, I don't know what percentage, even within my circle, it's hard to know which ones are and which ones aren't, because I only hear of the doctors that are empowering their patients and giving them a chance to make those lifestyle changes. A little more activity, a little less sugar, to see if that changes the blood work. And so that is happening. So we are progressing in that respect.
I think it depends. I think there's going to be some people listening to this who go to their doctor and say they want to try a lifestyle modification, and the doctor is just going to shut them down and say, you have to be on this medication. This is the playbook, and this is the way you do it. And that's what some people are going to encounter when they start bringing data into their doctor. Hey, doc, I tried this. I modified my diet. I made some modifications. Here's what I'm getting. Some of them are going to get a door slammed in their face, and at that time you should decide if you want to continue working with that person. And others are going to find practitioners who are quite receptive, and maybe give them some ways to make those lifestyle modifications a little better and be supportive of what this person is trying to do. So I don't think we can generalize. It just depends on who you're working with.
Absolutely.
And there's some amazingly talented practitioners out there, and that's all they do is help people with lifestyle modification, diet, exercise, sleep, stress, issues related to digestion, the microbiome, that has huge implications, issues related to thyroid, interrelation related to heavy metal exposure, toxins. These are things that are just a little outside of what the traditional doctor will look at, but there are professionals out there who can help you scratch a little deeper And that was a big part of my journey, finding one of these doctors who helped me finally identify where I really needed to focus. Because when I was going through my health transformation, I had a lot of physical symptoms, but all my blood work looked great according to the normal testing. But I had to scratch a few levels deeper to find out what was really going on and work with a different type of healthcare professional.
How does this work for the layperson? So does somebody sign up with your company and you pull all the records together? Can you explain the process for the listeners?
Yeah, sure. So like I said, I had to do it the old school way. I had to phone all my doctors. I got 4 loads of paper mailed to me, kind of like what you got when you were getting those papers handed to you from the military. So I basically had all of these folders. So I just put it all in a spreadsheet and I made like a row for each blood test. Oh. And that was just incredible. Now we can do that electronically. So you just sign into the app. And for example, maybe you have a Fitbit scale at home, you want to connect. Maybe you measure your blood pressure. Maybe you use an app like MyFitnessPal. Those all will electronically sync. So you set up your dashboard. I want my weight, my body fat, my steps, my sleep, my blood sugar, my ketones, whatever you're tracking, my waist circumference. So you set up a dashboard. And then there's a part where you can also sync up your medical records. The key to our system, Glenn, is we wanted people to be able to see their lab test results, which come from the doctor, right next to the information that was helping them see their lifestyle choices. And so we put all of that together so you can sync up your medical records and look at your, let's just pick on triglycerides and cholesterol. You can see that right next to your exercise and next to your sleep and next to your grams of sugar consumed. Mm-hmm. So we close this feedback loop and help people see the big picture. It's not that hard. If you can connect a Fitbit to an iPhone, you can sign up and link it up and start getting some data. Start small, and then as you get more comfortable with the idea of using numbers to manage your health, then it becomes really, really fun. And then it's just, you can go as deep down the rabbit hole as you want to. My hope in life is that people start to develop more awareness around these numbers. And we're not defaulting to the doctor, and we're being more preventative and proactive.
If I were to sign up today, how far back would it pull my medical records?
Anything you can see inside the patient portal would sync with our system. So I've got data in my account going back to 2005. I think I've got 4 different medical facilities connected to my profile. And those are in completely different parts of the country. So this is important to mention, Glenn. We are now in a position where we're actually empowering individuals with more data than even their doctor has. I just moved to Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm starting with a new doctor. They have 0 of my medical history, except the tests that they run in that office. Mm-hmm. So they can run a set of tests for me and give me some interpretation, and I can be like, yeah, I've got 20 years of data here, doc, and that doesn't jive. So now people are coming in armed, actually, and educated, because there's amazing podcasts like yours. There's incredible information available to consumers. Yeah, you got to sift through some noise, and some of it's a pile of hot garbage. But there is incredibly talented and educated healthcare professionals putting information online. So anybody can go find out what these numbers mean, and anyone can start putting their data together. And now the consumer technology, just putting an Apple Watch on, that's measuring every step, every heartbeat, all of our sleep. We now have access to more powerful tools, quite frankly, than the old school doctor does. It's really exciting to be able to manage our health this way, and I think it's very timely because so many people need it.
I really love the idea of people taking more autonomy over their own health and knowing what's going on and not just blindly giving it to the doctor. Not to say that doctors in general do a bad job with that. I would say they probably do quite a fine job, and people can make matters worse by doing their own research and getting confused online and then telling their doctor they want a drug that they saw advertised on TV. So that's got to be pretty hard for the doctors too, to in their 15 or 20 minutes they get to see a patient, to educate them and to try to talk them, off of their podium of where they are with their what might be false knowledge or just not complete knowledge.
Yeah, that's a tricky part. Sometimes the incentives aren't aligned. Doctors have a very finite amount of time to see an individual, make a recommendation, and move on. And that just is how the system works and how the compensation models work. And then there are other healthcare professionals who don't take insurance. Someone who's an expert in nutrition or functional medicine or naturopathic medicine, or someone who's going to sit down with you for an hour and help you understand these numbers. So there is an educational component to this for sure. And we don't want to have everybody out there playing doctor for themselves. But when you're working on your health, it becomes pretty intuitive which numbers you need to keep an eye on, which way those numbers need to move. And there is really, really good information out there. And the numbers don't lie. So you can at least get some data, start to shop around, get different inputs. You always have to have your own BS detector on, Glenn. So yes, we're giving you data, but always, put your own internal BS detector on and just decide, okay, this seems like information I identify with, I connect with, that resonates with me, and I'm going to try a few changes, see if the numbers move. And there are people who probably shouldn't be measuring their health. And if you are not able to separate any let's say you get a bad reading in the morning from your blood sugar, you can't get all bent out of shape, from one bad reading. And that's hard to do for a lot of people. They may get stuck on that or fixated on that.
They internalize or emotionalize these numbers.
Totally. And I'm guilty of it as well sometimes. So you have to just kind of understand that you're looking for longer term averages. One bad number is not a bad thing. So we have to know how to use data responsibly as well. We have access to this information, so we need to know how to use it responsibly. And we don't see too many people struggle with that, but it's something to keep in mind for sure as we start to get access to more tools and more data on our health. How do we use this in a way that is mentally and emotionally healthy for us, I guess is the way to think about it.
Is there any sort of tutelage on teaching the users to be a little more, or to be scientific when they look at the numbers rather than emotional?
I think that's going to vary from person to person. And I think that's where there is going to be a little bit of practice on the part of the individual, just to take a step back and put it all in context. In most cases, then we see people who actually really find the data to be quite interesting and rewarding. Being able to look at a great night's sleep and understand, oh man, okay, I finished dinner earlier last night and my sleep was off the charts good. This is stuff that if you're interested in your health and passionate about your health, learning how to use the data is incredibly rewarding. And so we just need to keep in the back of our minds that we want to put context behind all of this and not to take one bad number as something that gets us too bent out of shape.
Yeah. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about my personal experience with myself and then other people I've coached. And I mean, to put it in context, I have a bit of a scientific mind. I trust science. I believe science. I mean, you have to dig into the science to make sure it is trustable and believable. But nonetheless, my mind works really well like that. So when I put a gadget on myself, I get a number, okay, and then I do it again the next day, okay. And, for example, when I was getting into bike racing, I was wearing a heart rate monitor with every training ride, and I had a logbook, what my max was, what my average was, how long I was out, things like that. And then, after a couple of years of that, the battery died. I didn't replace it. And I found I was fine. I didn't need that information because I already had that background of how I feel under certain situations. So when my heart is beating at 150 beats per minute, I know how I feel physically. So then when I would go out and train after that, I had a pretty good intuition of how I was. And I've used the same thing. I've heard other people do the same thing with food, that actually the science and the the numbers and monitoring it can help them become a little more intuitive. And I know that sounds contradictory, but when we're trying, it's essentially biofeedback. When we're trying to understand these vague signals our body's giving us, like a lot of times people will eat when in fact they're only thirsty or maybe they're tired, and they're feeling something from their body, but they're misinterpreting it. So I fully endorse the numbers and the gadgets that people are using because it can help them clarify things.
So you bring up an excellent point, Glenn. You used the heart rate monitor. You started to get some biofeedback around how your heart rate is responding to different physical loads. And you got to a place where you now had a very intimate understanding of how that worked. And then you didn't need to test every single day. Maybe you just wanted to test once a month, just to check in and see how you're doing against baseline. But the point is you developed that awareness between how your physical body responds to a stress load. And that helped you have a new perspective on your physical body. The same thing, let's use an example of blood sugar. I think metabolic disorders, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity, are epidemic levels globally. So just to use a similar example, maybe somebody is testing their blood sugar every morning when they wake up. And for the first few weeks, they're like, wow, okay, mine's pretty high. And they start to say, okay, if I get some more exercise today, what is my blood sugar tomorrow? Oh, okay, just with a couple extra miles of walking, I'm down from 110 to 90. That's pretty interesting. And then you start to do some experiments with diet. Okay, let me change and get my carbs under 50 grams. Then what happens to my blood sugar? And so now someone is developing an awareness between lifestyle choice and how that affects arguably one of the 3 months of tracking your food, testing your blood sugar, and seeing how it modifies. You maybe need to test every day. Okay, I get it. I know how this whole system works. I'm good. Now you're maybe testing less frequently when you eat a new meal, for example, or when you're getting back into fitness after some time off. So we use the tools, we use the data, we understand our body, and we're more educated and empowered as a result.
You are listening to the Live Fit podcast. You can find more information about this episode, plus Live Fit's weight loss, health improvement programs, and coaching at livefitpodcast.com. See you there.
Have you noticed anybody misdiagnosing themselves? What sort of pitfalls are there with this?
I think that you always have access to healthcare professionals if you have questions. I think, if anything, there's probably less misdiagnosing going on because it's not just an individual who's getting one perspective on information from one doctor. So now an individual may be able to do some of their own homework online and actually find out that there's completely alternative ways to treat that problem. You know, my doctor said I could do X. That probably works. But here's 4 other ways that I found that I could attack this problem. So if anything, I think it's democratizing. It's opening up more opportunities to get opinions. You know, so a great example, Glenn, I had a family member who was recently misdiagnosed with thyroid cancer.
Oh, no.
And it was through their own research online. Actually, he understood some of the blood tests that his doctor had used to make the diagnosis, and through his own research found a website for a thyroid cancer center in Florida that had published an article that actually identified what's really going on. And so had this individual not had his lab test results at his fingertips and not had the ability to do some research, it would have been a complete misdiagnosis and misremoval of the thyroid gland. So to answer your question, I think, yes, people can look at this information and potentially misinterpret, but on the other side of the coin, it opens up the ability to get multiple opinions, to do your own homework, to find options for managing our health outside of just what traditional medicine offers us. So I'd say over the long run, it's a win for individuals to be able to do more research and get more opinions.
Yeah, I had a guest on the show during my sugar battle series, and she was diagnosed also with something about her thyroid. I don't think it was cancer, but basically they wanted to kill her thyroid, and then she would have to be on thyroid meds for the rest of her life. And she did some research, and she decided to cut out aspartame from her diet in all forms, sugarless gum and diet sodas, and the problem corrected itself just by not putting aspartame in her body anymore.
Yeah, and had that person not done their own research diligently and just accepted the de facto recommendation, that would be a very, very different outcome. I mean, imagine if this individual had found that out after they'd incorrectly had a thyroid procedure done. I mean, I can't even imagine how livid I would be.
And taking thyroid meds daily is probably, next to diabetes, one of the most pain in the butt medication rituals that a person has to do, because they have to take it in the morning before they eat. They have to give, I think, 2 hours break in between eating. The dosages are not always right, and so it takes a while to get the right dosage, and then the person gets older and the dosage needs to change, and it's a huge pain in the butt. And it's not as easy to test as blood sugar, where a diabetic can adjust their insulin accordingly.
Totally. Yeah. Blood sugar and metabolic are actually one of the easier ones to deal with, because it's very easy to test at home. It's very easy to test things like how much carbohydrate am I putting in my body. So, metabolic disorders are an easy one. Thyroid, much more complex. And like you said, trying to be on a synthetic thyroid takes a lot of calibration to try to emulate what the body does to regulate that stuff. So, I guess the point here is there's always more than one solution to a problem. And if you've got the right information, you can be empowered. You can do your own research and then do what feels right for you.
What sort of services does Heads Up Health offer?
Essentially, it's a dashboard for all of your health metrics. It's a web and mobile app. So you can sign up at headsuphealth.com, get your account set up, get some of the numbers in there that are most important for you. And the numbers change over time. As I get more educated around my health, the things I'm looking at change. For the first 5 years, I didn't even test my blood sugar. I didn't even know what the heck it meant. I was more interested in testing body composition, body fat, weight loss. I was working on some thyroid stuff. And now I'm at a point in my life where I'm 43. So I'm very focused on things like tracking blood sugar and sleep and recovery. As an entrepreneur, one of the most important things for me is making sure I rest enough. So having really good data on my sleep and my heart rate variability is very important. And in 2, 3, 4 years, the numbers I'm tracking may change. So we don't really prescribe anything. It's come in, set up the numbers that are important to you, and have some data on your health. So you can just think of it as the ultimate health dashboard for whichever metrics you deem to be important.
When you say set up the numbers that are important to you, does that mean that every test that you've ever done is available, but you might only want to follow your blood sugar and triglycerides, something like that?
Yeah, maybe the doctor ran 30 tests. You don't understand what 25 of them mean, but there's 5 that you know. Okay, I know I have a family history of heart disease. I really want to keep an eye on my cholesterol levels. I know I have a family history of diabetes. I really want to keep an eye on my hemoglobin A1C. Okay. These other ones, not 100% sure what they mean. I want to make sure that they're all within the normal range. Maybe I'll ask my doctor about them. Maybe I'll do some research on them. So you get the blood work in there, and then you can define anything you want to measure at home. Just take, for example, your MyFitnessPal data. Maybe for a couple months you want to track your calories and your protein and your fat and your carbs. And that would be something you'd have on your dashboard. Wow, if I keep my carbohydrates below 50 grams, my blood sugar changes. So nutrition data, a lot of people just looking to keep the weight off, tracking weight, body fat percentage. Maybe you don't like stepping on the scale, because that can be very misleading for a lot of people, because weight never moves down linearly. It's always kind of an up and down. It's the trend that matters. So a lot of people don't even step on the scale. They just want to get out the old-fashioned sewing tape and measure their waist circumference once a month. That's actually a great way to track body composition, because you're not getting bent out of shape on the scale. And if you're measuring your waist circumference once a month, you have more time for the trends to emerge. So some people just track waist circumference. So that's what I mean when we say set up the metrics that are going to motivate you. And the metrics for an athlete are completely different from the metrics for, say, a type 2 diabetic, for example. And those dashboards would be completely different.
If I were to go to the doctor today, my doctor, and have just an annual checkup, including a blood test, how long till I would see results on Heads Up Health?
If the doctor's portal is already connected with Heads Up Health, typically the results will refresh within 72 hours.
Okay, because I'm able to see those numbers on my insurance company's website.
Mm-hmm.
And so am I understanding that when it goes live on that site, it would also go live on Heads Up Health?
Yep, if we can connect to the doctor's office electronically, most of them we can connect to, then the data updates just like it would update from your Fitbit. It's really no different.
And my I'm through Kaiser Permanente, and they use Care Everywhere in Epic in their medical records, and not everything has been ported over from, I think, only the last not even few years necessarily, because there was I was going to the VA in the meantime, and my VA information didn't port over to Kaiser's. And then there's several that are from, older than 10 years that didn't port over. Is Heads Up Health going to bring in those others that didn't port over to Kaiser?
Well, both the VA and the Kaiser portals would connect to Heads Up. So we would connect both of those systems, and we would sync the data from both systems, clean it all up, and put it all on one trend line. So we may be able to actually get some of that historical data, Glenn, from the VA connection. And so that's something we would test. If you have any hard copies or PDFs of the older data, we can actually enter that information into the system so that it's there permanently. So for really old data, like with some of my old records, I just signed in and entered the test results manually, just like I did in my spreadsheet. Mm-hmm. It takes maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then the data's in there forever. And okay, here's the test results I entered manually from 2005. I see those right next to the data that's being synced from the VA, and right next to the data that's being synced from Kaiser. So now you have it all in one trend line, and it's there forever, and that's the way we would approach it.
That's amazing. I love it. I love this idea. Can you give us an idea of what it costs for somebody to be a member of Heads Up Health?
Yeah, it's $9 a month, $79 a year, and we can set up a discount for your listeners, Glenn, if they want to try it. You can go to our website and try it for 30 days for free. You don't have to put a credit card in, and use all of our features and make sure you like it, and then you can subscribe or don't subscribe. So we make it really easy for people to test it out, get comfortable, and then decide if they want to upgrade or not. And I can put together a 20% code for your listeners as part of the show here if you think that would be helpful. Yeah, try it for 30 days. There's a chat inside the app if you have any questions getting set up. We've got a great support team that'll answer your questions, get you on board, and then just decide if it's something that you think is going to be a valuable part of your health tool set.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds great. $79 a year is quite a reasonable price. I'm very surprised, and thanks for the offer of the 20% off for my listeners. I'm sure that's going to pique their interest.
Well, Glenn, you mentioned you have a background in the military and with systems and with engineering. This is an extremely technically difficult problem to solve. So it's taken us a really long time to be able to do what we said we're going to do.
Oh, bad.
On the outside looking in, you're like, oh, yeah, this pulls together all these Epic portals and pulls in my Apple Watch and my MyFitnessPal data. There's so much amazing technology on the market now. It almost makes everything kind of look easy when you're coming in from the outside.
It looks easy, but they all speak different languages.
Oh, man, this is a massively complicated technical challenge that we have decided to take on with the sole purpose is that we want to put this data in people's hands and give them some beautiful charts and graphs and really make tracking your data fun and engaging. So it's been a labor of love to get it to this point, but it's not an easy technical problem to solve, and that's probably why the healthcare system at large still doesn't really have good ways to get all your health data organized. It's all scattered.
Well, I love charts and graphs. So how can people find you or find Heads Up Health?
Yeah, you can find us on the website headsuphealth.com. We've got our own podcast called Data Driven Health Radio, where we break down the numbers. We demystify some of these lab tests. What do they mean? How do I understand these numbers? So we've got our own show and blog on there with some good content. My personal email is dave@headsuphealth.com. I'm 100% accessible if anybody has questions. So that's how you can get started with us.
Oh, that's fantastic, Dave. I really appreciate you coming on the show and enlightening us on what technology can bring, or how technology can bring us to better health and give us more autonomy of our own health, give us our control that we deserve.
I always love jamming with a fellow health nerd, Glenn. Thank you for having me.
Well said. Well said. Love it. All right, Dave. Well, you go off and have a wonderful day in the sun, and we'll be in touch.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Live Fit Podcast. Please subscribe and share with someone you care about. Read show notes, articles, resources, and learn more about our weight management programs at livefitpodcast.com. Once again, thanks for listening, and always remember to live fit.